I'd love to introduce Breno Aragon. Breno is a multidisciplinary artist who was born in Brazil. He writes that the relationship between film, sound, and observer is more important than the representation of what is on the screen. Just as the painter, in his words, just as the painter thinks in terms of line, form, and color, the poet and musician think in terms of words, sounds, and silence as vehicles that bear emotion. The correlation between two musical notes is a thought. The sum of more of these relationships are an idea. Working with this combination of sound and video synthesis, the work reflects his soundtracks of inhabiting these worlds. We are so happy to have him in his show. So I will turn it over to you now, Breno. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Courtney. You guys put such a beautiful place together and, making the community stronger because of what you do. So it's really appreciated. I'm gonna start talking a little bit about my history and my background to kind of maybe give you guys a better idea of who I am today as an artist. So my name is Breno Aragon. I was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I moved to the U.S. when I was 4 years old. I felt like, my childhood, I was pretty much like luggage to my parents. I was just moving around every 2 years. Lived in Florida, lived in Quebec, lived in Houston, back to Florida. And then when I was 12 years old, I moved back to Brazil. And in Brazil, I kind of discovered music. I started playing with my first band when I was about 14, 15 years old. And I was fortunate enough that relationship lasted about 10 years. So that was kind of my first, development as an artist. And in those years, maybe around 2005, 2006, through music, I kind of fell into photography. Since I lived in Rio and I had access to these music venues, I was able to go around and photograph concerts and do portraits of artists. And then around 2006, I was able to land a job as a photo assistant in a photo gallery in downtown Rio. And that was amazing, like the first photo shoot, I was 21 and it was like a nude photo shoot. There's people smoking weed on set. They were paying me, they were feeding me. I was like, what took me so long? And, to find this job, I felt like finally I found a calling for something that was creative. I always had trouble studying and finding some kind of reasoning in school. And in photography, I finally found a subject that had some kind of also, not just creative outlet, it was also a technical aspect to it that I could learn and study and develop, that through the creative inspiration, I gained, just a reason to kind of study the technicality of it. And it was a really fun thing to study. And also talking about the development as an artist, having my own language. My mother suggested I do therapy around the time. I was like, I couldn't do analysis. I couldn't find someone that I could talk to. Eventually, I found an art therapist. And through art therapy, that kind of changed my whole perspective because I had a lot of trust issues, finding someone I could talk to, finding someone that could if I don't have trust for someone, how can I talk to a person who, I feel like being judged. But through art, I was able to make something and interpret the things that were coming out on my own. They were pretty much my own interpretations of the things that were coming out from my unconscious in a way. And that kind of got me into collage, making collage work. And through that, I think that was a very important time in my life where I didn't understand the importance of it until I went to art school years later. And then kind of had to, find reasoning behind, why do you do this? Why do you do that? So that was a really important kind of evolution for me. But I came to San Francisco in 2009 to get my master's in photography. And that was a really fun time for me. I'd never been to California before I moved to San Francisco. So even though I'd lived in the US for 8 years as a kid, California is just an amazing place to land. And San Francisco, of all the places in the US, I think is one of the more magical places. But then, just check my notes. Sorry guys, I don't want to ramble on for too long. But so that was my time. So in San Francisco, I got into photography around 2011. I got back into music because when I moved to San Francisco, I completely abandoned music. My life revolved around these 5 other guys I played music with every day, saw them every day. I felt like all the success, all the failure was kind of on the weight of the shoulders of this relationship. And in photography, in my mind, all the responsibility for the success of the failure are on my shoulders. So that was something that I was like, okay, I'm gonna trade one art that is very elusive and very hard to pin down for another one, but at least this time it's on my terms, it felt like. And so, so I already had music and I already had the visual aspect of things kind of going around. But the work you guys here see today this is my first time putting together the visual and the audio element together. And I knew I kind of wanted to do it. I wasn't really sure, how I was going to put it together. And one night I opened up my computer and I've been a surfer since I was 14, 15 too. And I left the Surfline camera open. So the Surfline camera, if you're not a surfer, it's pretty much a website that shows you waves everywhere in the world in real time. Wow. And I usually have the Ocean Beach cam of Balboa and I think it's Franklin or something, yeah. But it's open 24/7. I have my view out my window and the surf cam open at all times. And I opened it up at night and it was foggy and rainy and there was this beautiful texture happening on the screen. I was like, wow, it's kind of abstract and beautiful. So I did a screen recording of that for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And at the time, I'd been super inspired by ambient music. I've been kind of studying synthesis and guitar pedals and making, just making weird ambient sounds and just kind of falling into that meditative, creative process. And through that, I was like, okay, well, maybe if I put these two together, and they kind of feel like a glove. It's like, Pink Floyd and the Wizard of Oz somehow happening when you make that, but you don't know how it happens, but sometimes when you put two things together, they just kind of fit like a glove. And so I ended up making like a series of 3 or 4 videos of different nights, different recordings. Some of them are more abstract than others. This one's the one that has a little more of, I guess you can kind of see what's happening in it a little bit, but without the context of what you're looking at. It's really nice to kind of just see these glowing orbs on the horizon. A lot of people think that the image isn't moving, but if you look at it really slowly, you can see there's something slowly floating on the surface of the ocean. So that's kind of how I got to this today. But where else? Yeah, I think the work definitely draws a lot on the relationship between art and the observer. I always like to question, what is art? Who are we when we make art? And I think those are really valid conversations for artists to have between themselves and with other people when they have the opportunity. So that's really nice that we have this chance to come together, talk a little bit about what we do, and share these, these concepts and these our creative adventures. Let's see. Yeah, I guess. I think as a closing statement, I would like to say, I guess as artists, we shouldn't be afraid of making bad art. We should be afraid of making no art. Also, I brought some book suggestions tonight I feel like it's always nice to see, just to talk about our things that inspire us. So I brought one on poetry, 2 on art philosophy, and 1 is a photo book. So The Americans by Robert Frank is a very awesome photo book, just like classic, Americana, like a picture, a slice of the U.S., in a time where I guess photography was like, it was a poetic language, and it was still kind of coming up. So this is a really beautiful book. If you guys want to pass it around and check it out. 1 on art philosophy, 2 on art philosophy. 1 is Camera Lucida by Roland Barthes. It's definitely a really good insight on art philosophy, on just how to approach creativity in general, not just for photography, but I guess for any creative practice. The Search for the Real by Hans Hofmann. That's also a really, really good art philosophy book, just about process and creativity and just nurturing your creative inner self. And one of my favorite poets of all time is Rabindranath Tagore. He's a poet from India. He writes beautiful kind of one-line sentences that just kind of paint a picture with very few words. So it's super inspiring to me that, I'm super appreciative of minimal poetry. I like people that can say distill a lot into few things, and I feel like Rabindranath Tagore is definitely one of those. So I don't know if you guys want to pass these around and check them out real quick, but
Thank you.
yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
I do.
Yeah.
When you were referencing the sound, you mentioned it in the idea of sight.
Yeah, yeah.
So sounds like it's intentional, which was my question. And just how do you bring visual to sound, or does sound bring visual to you?
I think everything goes both ways a little bit, right? I think like the visuals influence the music, the music. I grew up with a lot of music in my life. You know, my parents were big. Like my dad always had like the 12 CD player in the trunk. He always had his CD collection that was sacred. And like traveling around the U.S., like music was the soundtrack to growing up. You know, with like Police, Men at Work, Pink Floyd, like all the classics from the '80s. So I was able to kind of just, you know, I think as a musician, I tried to distill or just draw on that, for lack of a better word, maybe cliche or musical memory, like to try to pinpoint that idea of a thought and like, okay, what does that remind me of? And as much as you might try to emulate your artistic and musical references, you're never gonna exactly copy those. So I'm a huge fan of try to copy as hard as you can your artistic references. You know, if you're inspired by someone, just emulate them. You know, just steal from them. Like you're never gonna copy it and make an exact copy. No matter what, it's always gonna turn into something of your own, I think.
Yes.
Did you find the structure that was necessary to develop your skill, both as a musician and a photographer? Was the structure of that a point of departure for you to then find your own voice?
That's a really good question.
As like a base.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really fortunate when I was young because I had a really hard time with, I guess, the authority of teachers. So with music, I looked into like a really good music teacher that took all my musical references and he was able to distill that down into technique, and I was able to kind of learn the basics at the same time where I was kind of also copying my influences. So that was a really important time. With photography, it was interesting because I started working in a fashion studio when I was about 21 or 22, so that gave me the basic fundamentals of photography. But it's only when I came to San Francisco that, you know, I kind of had to unlearn what I had learned to learn it right again, learn the technique of black and white, went to the dark room, you know, just learn all the technicality of photography, the history of photography, so I could then take what I learned from it and make it my own in a way. So that's the structure of photography. I think was a little deeper than the music. Music-wise, I've been always a little self-taught. Like my own curiosity is what kind of led my evolution as a musician.